Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for a collaborative event between WAND, the Women and Development Unit of the University of the West Indies Open Campus, and UWIHARP Cave Hill. This evening's discussion is called Reclaiming Sexual Pleasure After Sexual Trauma. And we are going to get into the topic, discussing a range of issues that women and other persons face with regards to experiencing sexual trauma and what happens to their bodies and what happens to their minds, their state of mind, their sexual activity and so on after they have experienced sexual trauma. We have three expert panelists here this evening. Brenda Roach, Katrina Ifill, and Latoya Lane. And this evening's session will be moderated by Kellyanne Knight of WAND and UWIHARP. I'm Taitu Heron, the Head and Development Specialist of the Women and Development Unit, and I'll be chairing the session. And we will also be joined by Kalia Anderson of UWIHARP, who will be monitoring the chat and who will be giving us questions based on what is discussed in the chat as well. So before I go any further, I'm going to immediately hand over to our moderator for the evening, Kellyanne Knight. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. A warm welcome to all of you again. I'm Kellyanne Knight, as Taitu mentioned, the moderator for this evening's discussion, and I'm wearing two hats today. I'm currently the Women and Development Unit's course tutor and facilitator, and also this evening, I'll be filling in as moderator for Monique Springer, who is the project officer with UWIHARP. And just to give you a brief overview of UWIHARP, UWIHARP is the HIV sexual health unit at the UWI, and they seek to positively influence the sexual and reproductive health and wellness of the university population and the wider Caribbean society. UWIHARP's primary focus is the development of sexual health literacy among the community through programs such as its digital dialogues, which are informal sexual health conversations. They include the S-Files discussion series on a wide range of topics and the Shock series, which focuses on sexual health issues among our vulnerable Caribbean populations during COVID-19. Before we get into our discussion, we have a few participating guidelines and notices. We ask that all mics are muted and videos are off. The Q&A session will take place after the presentation. And during the presentation, we ask that you post your questions or comments in the Q&A chat pod located at the bottom of the screen. We aim to address as many of your questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Alternatively, if you do not feel comfortable asking questions, you can send your questions to the host privately. That would be myself, Taitu Heron, or Kilia Anderson, and we can ask those questions on your behalf. For those questions that we couldn't get to during the discussion, please email them to wand@open.uwi.edu or uwiharp@cavehill.uwi.edu, and we will try to address them as soon as possible or shortly after the discussion. This discussion will not be live streamed, but the session will be recorded, and the recordings may be posted afterwards on our social media platforms. However, we will review the recordings before posting and remove any sensitive personal discussions to protect the participant's identity. Though we aim to create a safe space for this intimate discussion, please note that we cannot guarantee confidentiality in this public forum among participants, so be cautious about what personal information you disclose about yourselves and others. It is safer to talk in general terms. Additionally, there's some few notes of participation, some of which have been adapted from the HIV 2020 online that we would like to be guided by for this discussion. In this WAND and UWIHARP digital dialogue partnership, we seek to provide a safe space to address a range of sexual health topics using a sex-positive approach. We encourage participants to share their knowledge, experiences, and opinions in a respectful manner, You may disagree with the views highlighted today, however, please be respectful of other outlooks, regardless of your religious or moral beliefs. Let us be mindful in the way that we discuss sensitive topics. We will be operating under a zero tolerance policy for any kind of abuse, discriminatory, belligerent, or disparaging comments or actions that may cause distress to presenters and our participants. Persons who engage in any undesirable behaviors will be immediately removed from the webinar unannounced, and UWIHARP follows the principle first, do no harm. For this evening's discussion, reclaiming sexual pleasure after sexual trauma, in commemoration of International Day for the Discrimination of Violence Against Women. We are graced by the presence of three expert panelists, as title mentioned: Brenda Roach, registered counseling psychologist; Katrina Ifill, communication specialist and sensual empowerment leader; and Latoya Lane, sex coach, educator, and sexologist. Our first guest, Brenda Roach, will touch on the impact of trauma on intimacy. Brenda will be discussing what happens to women's bodies and mental state when we are sexually violated, whether during childhood or as an adult. And to tell you a bit about Brenda, Brenda Roach is a registered counseling psychologist, and she has a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, and a certification in psychological first aid from the Johns Hopkins University. She specializes in helping her clients to overcome grief and loss, which includes the death of a loved one, loss of a relationship due to illness or breakup, loss of financial security, loss of self, or disenfranchised losses, such as a miscarriage or being unable to conceive. These types of losses are hidden and not physically seen. Having overcome life-altering losses of her own and using evidence-based interventions that are practically and clinically tested has given her the tools to help others to do the same. Brenda currently offers services in the areas of grief, trauma, addiction, and behavioral issues, such as anxiety and self-esteem. She is the author of Reflecting and Journaling Towards a Meaningful Life, a guided journal entitled A Simple Guide to Daily Journaling, and a 6-month journal entitled Gratitude, Happiness, and Celebration. She is currently the school counselor at the American University of Integrative Sciences, located in Barbados, and has a practice at JRB Medical Center, located number 12, 10th Avenue, Belleville, St. Michael. Brenda, I welcome you and thank you for joining us this evening. The floor is yours.
Okay, so we're going to look at the impact of trauma on intimacy. And some of the learning objectives or some of the things that we will go through. I always like to start with a definition. So we'll look at a definition of trauma. We'll look at types and symptoms of trauma, common symptoms displayed by trauma survivors, bodily impacts, so how trauma is manifested physically in your body, impacts on relationships, because we know that, you're not a silo, you're not by yourself, you're not living by yourself. And so it's going to impact the relationships that you have, whether they're intimate relationships or whether they're just relationships that you have with others. And then, of course, seeking help or working through trauma. So at first, I'd like to start with the definition. And this definition I took from the American Psychological Association. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives, and psychologists can, and as well as psychiatrists, can help these individuals find constructive ways of managing their emotions. And to continue with that, trauma is a complex response to an intense, disturbing event that causes a person's coping mechanisms to backfire. So it's not like something is wrong with you, but it's just that because of the type of event that you would have experienced, and of course I've listed a whole host of them here, then it's understandable that some of our coping mechanisms would backfire. And it causes sometimes trauma victims or survivors to feel hopeless, to feel unsafe. And so survivors of trauma can constantly feel intense emotions and have difficulty with trusting people. And that is normal. That's a normal reaction. So obviously when that happens, relationships and intimacy can often feel unattainable. There's a fear becoming close with someone else after a traumatic event. And that may also make the person feel as though they may be a burden to those around them. So let's explore a bit how we can work through that, understanding some of the physical manifestations that do turn up for trauma survivors. So let's look at some types of trauma. And typically trauma comes in 3 different forms. So we have the acute, we have the chronic, and we have the complex. So acute trauma results from a single incident. So one single event happens and the event threatens the person's emotional or physical security. The experience lasts or creates a lasting impression, and it can also affect the way the person thinks and behaves. And so that's the acute trauma. And then we have the chronic trauma, and that's repeated and prolonged trauma, such as domestic violence or abuse. Then we come to the complex trauma, and that is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive, sometimes it can be intended to be harmful, or interpersonal nature, right? So those are the 3 major types of trauma that people will experience. And some of the symptoms. So if we're looking at the acute, and remember we said that the acute trauma is from a single incident, okay? So if we look at that, some of the symptoms can generally include excessive anxiety or panic. So the person may end up having panic attacks at some points in time. Shock or denial, that's usually the first set of emotions or feelings that a person would go through. And I did mention the feelings of hopelessness, the feelings of guilt that will happen. There's also the nightmares or the insomnia, the feeling disconnected and the lack of trust, the inability to focus on work or studies, because of course, this is very acute. It's a single incident, but yet it still threatens the person's emotional and physical security. So we always have to keep that in mind, that that is what is happening. So then these types of symptoms would manifest. If we look at the chronic trauma symptoms, and remember, chronic trauma means that it's been repeated, it's prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. And of course, those symptoms can include the feelings of shame or guilt, difficulty controlling our emotions. You can have physical symptoms such as headaches or dizziness or chest pains. Of course, you can have the loss of concentration and attention. So you begin to dissociate. And when we say dissociate, it means that we take ourselves out of the current situation or the present, and we are in another safe space, the space that we have found that has caused us to feel safe in, so that we're not physically in the pain that we're in. Cutting ourselves off from family and friends because they might not understand what we're going through. Risky behavior such as abuse, drug abuse, alcohol misuse, suicidal thoughts are also a part of it. And then the complex trauma, some of those symptoms. And remember, we said complex trauma is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive, sometimes harmful or interpersonal nature. So if we think about that definition, and then we look at the symptoms, so change in personal self-concept. So of course, that foundational belief that you had of who you were, that changes because you have been exposed to multiple traumatic events. Distrust, you begin to distrust those around you, those close to you, even those that you haven't met. Suicidal thoughts, episodes of feeling detached from one's body or mental processes, hopelessness, feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, self-harm, substance abuse, becoming preoccupied with revenge. Those are the types of symptoms that you would experience as a complex trauma victim. And so trauma sensitizes us, and I'll get into a bit about the body's system, the different glands in the system and how they work. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician in that sense, but there's still some things that are physiological that impact your psychological. So when we think about the physiological impacts, trauma sensitizes the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the body's central stress response system. Okay, so you can think of this as the juncture of our central nervous system and endocrine system, which makes us more reactive to stress and more likely to increase the stress hormone cortisol. In certain situations, that hormone of cortisol is crucial, right? We need that in order, it helps to regulate the primary stress hormone. It increases sugars in the bloodstream and those types of things. So it is necessary, but unfortunately, it can also be toxic. So if there's an overstimulation or prolonged increases in the cortisol, it can become toxic. And ultimately, that leads to increased risks of health conditions, so such as depression or heart disease and that kind of thing, if it is prolonged. Remove the stressor and the body's hormones should respond the same way. So in other words, the body should respond with relaxing, and it should not be in that high stressed situation. The problem is, though, someone who's exposed to trauma may continue to produce these hormones, leading to adverse effects on the body over time. But trauma therapy can help to rebalance this natural reaction to stress. Okay, so the prolonged, the chronically high levels of the cortisol hormone can become toxic, but if it can be reduced, so if we can remove the stressor, then of course the body should be able to regulate on its own. And if it doesn't, then of course, then you can get some trauma therapy to assist with that. So how it usually turns up in terms of the psychological now, they're noticed first when they disrupt your everyday life. So we know that they're usual daily activities that we usually take part in, and we realize that we can no longer take part in them and enjoy them the way we would. So disrupting our day-to-day lives, leading to anxiety, depression, anger, intense fear, the flashbacks and the paranoia. And the traumatic experience could also affect and alter perceptions. So how we view the world and how we think the world views us, that perception can change dramatically. And this can lead to the belief that the world around them is unsafe and other people are dangerous, or in extreme cases, create altered personalities to help them cope with the trauma, because that's our brain's way of helping us to cope. We create a different personality, not intentionally, but it helps to protect us and shield us from what's actually happening. So this can then lead to several disorders, like I mentioned before, so the anxiety and the depression. And then of course we have the post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, which we also know, and which is often triggered by witnessing or experiencing a shocking, dangerous or terrifying event, such as, the war zone combat victims, which we've heard a lot about in association with PTSD. However, symptoms may not appear until several months or even years later. And according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, there are several leading indicators, and I'll read those indicators for you. So re-experiencing the trauma through distressing memories of the event, so flashbacks and nightmares. You have emotional detachment and avoidance of places, people, and activities that are reminders of the trauma. Increased arousal, such as difficulty sleeping and concentrating, feeling jumpy and being easily irritated and angered, and adverse changes in thinking and mood. So how does all of that, is that really the question? How does all that affect relationships? I think after you've heard all of that, you could imagine how it would impact relationships, right? So trauma, because of its lasting effects on the survivor, can cause impacts on relationships and romantic partners. So you would have the avoidance of and decrease in emotional and physical intimacy, which can lead to emotionally fueled disagreements and can lead to intense arguments about the relationship, issues and concerns that may have happen on both parts. The isolation. So then because you are feeling all of these things that are impacting you physiologically and psychologically, then of course you begin to isolate, because who wants to be around me? Because I've gone through all of this, no one understands. And so I begin to pull away. I withdraw a lot, sometimes even completely being unresponsive when a partner is trying to communicate. And this, of course, stems from the survivor's false belief that their partner is working against them. Again, remember, there's a lot of distrust that happens after you experience any type of trauma. The survivor has doubts about the love and commitment in the relationship because, of course, you're feeling misunderstood, you're feeling as though you're not heard. And so then that leads to a whole set of frustration, anger, confusion, sadness, and all of the above. While the partner may be constantly while the partner may be constantly trying to give love to the survivor, it can be hard for the survivor to accept it despite the constant reassurance of love. And these problems can obviously cause a relationship to end if left unaddressed. Normally, when I see partners who come into my office, and one of them has experienced trauma, they can feel completely frustrated and alone, not knowing how to make their partner feel better or what to do to save the relationship. And people in therapy are also affected by these same above issues, which can further aggravate their trauma symptoms by adding stress. And the result is two people in a relationship who both want the same things to heal and make the relationship healthy, but they have no idea how to accomplish it. So how do we work through trauma? And this is for the partners. No. So the first thing is, don't try to fix or heal the trauma and the accompanying symptoms your partner is experiencing. Don't try to heal or fix it. Sometimes you may mean well. You want to try to make things better by doing things that you think may help the person heal. And the fact is, healing from trauma takes time. It takes time. The brain needs time to process the traumatic information. And so the best thing a partner can do is to be available to listen when the person is experiencing the traumatic symptoms and they need to talk. Be supportive emotionally by offering statements such as, that sounds like it was really difficult, or that sounds like it is really difficult to deal with. I hear you saying this is really hard for you right now. And that makes the survivor feel as though they are being heard, that they're being listened to. And the power of just being present for another person is often underestimated. Don't take it personally. Your partner is working through something extremely difficult. And sometimes you have people who have been traumatized feel more distant emotionally, but that is not on you. So try not to take it personally. Sometimes they also don't want to be close physically. And that's understandable. If you've gone through, especially if it's a sexual assault, then obviously you may not want to be touched. So don't take it personally. Don't think that it is on you. This is not necessarily reflective of how the traumatized person feels about the relationship or about you. This is a common occurrence and part of the process. Don't make assumptions. Sometimes we can be all well-meaning as partners and assume a person who has recently been through something traumatic will not want to connect physically. So sometimes there are those partners that don't want to be touched, that don't want to connect physically, but there are others who may want that physical connection. There's also a fear that connecting physically will make the traumatic symptoms worse. And in some cases, this may be true, as sometimes, like I said, trauma is sexual in nature, and that can mean that sometimes healing will have to take place before physical intimacy can be resumed. However, it's important to communicate with your partner about what they want and how they would like to connect with you. And this can be a very ticklish subject. It can feel like an enormous elephant that is in the room, right? An elephant that you don't want to approach and touch and ask a question, but it's also important that it is acknowledged. If either partner feels rejected, damage to the relationship can occur. So again, this means that you have to overly communicate, keep talking. By discussing where each of you are and what your desires are, even if physical intimacy cannot occur, the damage to the relationship has been controlled because each person knows where they stand through that dialogue, through that communication. And consider getting your own counseling. Because there's always we always have to look at the supporter, the person who is trying to be there, the support system for the person who has gone through that traumatic experience. And sometimes that is even tougher for that person. So you have to look at self-care. Self-care is ever more important. And it means then that that support person needs to have support themselves, right? So don't overlook and think that, yes, you can take on everything, you can take on the world. Maybe you need to consider getting counseling of your own as well. And then for the traumatized individual, so involve your partner and communicate regularly. I can't overstate that enough. Communicate as much as possible. Many traumatized people are hesitant to share what they are going through with their loved ones for fear of becoming a burden. And many trauma survivors feel that way, right? That they don't want to burden or overly burden their partner with whatever it is that they're going through. And the fact is, when you don't communicate with your partner, they may feel confused and left out, and they don't know how to react, what they should do, from what they shouldn't do. Your partner may tend to become anxious and can sometimes do things to try to make you feel better, but these things may just end up distancing both of you. So let your partner know what you're going through. You don't have to give every intimate, gory detail, but you can let the partner know what you're going through as much as possible. Communicate so that at least then they will know. Sometimes it's just that you may want them to listen. And if that is so, tell them that that's what you want. Attend your counseling sessions and communicate with your therapist about any stressors that are happening within the relationship. That way, the therapist can offer comprehensive care to you, right? Because obviously the therapist is not living your life, and they're not going to know exactly what you may be going through. So communicating with your therapist as well, so that they know the types of stressors that you are facing within the relationship. And remember that there is always hope, and this is for both the survivor and the partner. I mean, people initially get into a relationship because there are things that draw them to one another. So when you're having difficulties within a relationship that are related to trauma, the problems that arise can sometimes distract you from what you love about your partner and why you want to work in the relationship. So a relationship can survive trauma if both people are willing to put in the effort that it takes to heal. And again, it takes time. So you just have to be able to put in that effort together as a team, as a unit. And your efforts will be fruitful. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Brenda Roach, for that very informative presentation. And that leads us smoothly into our second presenter, Katrina Ifill, who will lead us into the discussion on women's bodies and pleasure centers with a focus on orgasms. Katrina Ifill is a communications specialist with over 22 years of experience. She's also a sensual empowerment leader and creatrix of orgasmic intelligence. Katrina believes that the key to healing the world is for each woman to first heal herself through bliss. Katrina has been a practitioner of the ancient jade egg teaching since 2009, and coupled with the daily practice of the active self-love techniques upon which she has built her business. She brought herself from the depth of an abusive relationship to transform her into the more vibrant, sensual, blissful, self-aware woman that she is today, being a first-hand witness of her personal metamorphosis from victim to survivor, inspired her to enhance her skills and knowledge through training and studies to further share this journey and her teachings to all women and couples globally. Hence, there being the birth of her life business, Waves of Bliss, in May 2012, and subsequently African Jade Kawaida and Orgasmic Intelligence. With 2 years of operation, Katrina through the revolutionary concept of orgasmic intelligence, had witnessed and continues to witness the transformation of scores of women and couples who benefited from her tried and tested techniques and customized products. Katrina is a communication specialist by nature, qualification, and experience. She graduated from Howard University with a Bachelor of Arts in Human Communication Studies, is a certified massage therapist, and has specialized training in female pelvic floor training for birth and wellness professionals and somatic psychology. She is also a certified yoni breathing instructor and continues to pursue advanced techniques of Tantra. It is her love for communications which guided her to another passion and her life's purpose of women's empowerment and enrichment. She loves fiercely and unconditionally, starting with herself first. This guiding principle is what led her to her calling as a sensual empowerment leader since 2012. Her women's workshops and training programs have initiated the healing, liberation, and transformation of scores of women in Barbados, the Caribbean, the USA, UK, and Canada. The mother of four's personal motto is, I have given up perfection to live authentically. I now invite Katrina Ifill to join us through and hearing about reclaiming that sexual pleasure. Over to you, Katrina.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good
I was,
evening.
yes, I'm focusing on orgasms. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that will be some of the focus.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, good evening, everyone. So we're focusing on a little more than orgasm, looking at how experiences of sexual violence affect women's relationships. So this is intimate relationships, sex life desires, their bodies, intimate body parts, pleasure centers after. This is after the sexual violence. Okay, so pretty much the objectives are to just share a bit with you my story, very brief parts of my story. We're going to look at the effects of sexual violence, understanding the mind-body connection. We're going to talk about some tools and techniques. I'm going to just speak about the ones that I specialize in because I know Latoya is going to go deep into that. And then signs of healing. So this is a fact, according to the American Psychological Association. Research indicates that women are twice as likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, experience a longer duration of post-traumatic symptoms, and display more sensitivity to stimuli that remind them of trauma. Okay, so it shows that women, we're already predisposed to take on traumatic experiences. So just briefly, my story. Before I was 6 years old, I remember having my first orgasm. Yes, my first vaginal orgasm. And I used to call it the sweet spot. It was not through, I didn't get that through any stimulation of myself. It was actually through an older person sexually assaulted me. And from there on, I have always, believe in me, although this is my story. Ever since then, before 6 years old, the sweet spot, every single day I have worked assiduously to get that sweet spot and expand that sweet spot. And then later on, around 9 to 11 years old, I had an older man, a family friend, who assaulted me, and he used to start by tickling me. So tickling still has some triggers for me based on that. But then moving on from that, I started to grow up young girls my age, and this is not groping with permission. This was like I would just walk up to them and touch them because that is how I experience. And then as a grown woman, a 4-year abusive relationship, abusive sexually, mentally, emotionally, spiritually abusive relationship that I endured. And doing the work that I do now, I started it on a personal journey. I was able to leave that abusive relationship for good gained the courage to leave that abusive relationship for good, even with or without my life. And I started an active self-love journey and self-healing journey. And that's when I broke the cycle. So Brenda spoke about the effects on relationship and whatnot, but we're going to look at intimate relationships. This is the effects of sexual violence on women, of women in intimate relationships. So women who suffer sexual violence oftentimes are hesitant in getting into new relationships because of the memory of what happened, what could happen, the shame that comes with the fact that oftentimes they feel guilty, feel as though they were guilty, they were the ones who caused X, Y, or Z to happen to them. Some of them also experience a touch avoidance. So where if you touch them, it may be a body part, it may not even be like the breasts, like the actual genitals, but certain body parts where they experience that trauma, person grabbing them and holding them to pin them in a particular position, avoidance of touching that area can be an issue. And then of course intimacy avoidance, where they avoid intimacy, again linking back to because they have to be touched, they want to avoid being touched, the shame is still with them. And also sexual positions. I've had clients who, because they experience the sexual violence in a particular position, even if they do move on into a relationship, they're unable to have sexual intercourse in that particular position because it brings back the memories. Of course, the body is going through all of this, so they may experience vaginal dryness as well because she's unable to feel aroused, feel that pleasure, experiencing low libido. In some cases, it may be high libido as well. Anorgasmia, where she does not experience orgasm at all, where it may be a case that the orgasm may be not as intense, or they fizz, meaning that they don't last as long. And vaginismus is another issue where the vaginismus is where the vaginal muscles actually clench up upon penetration, whether it's a finger, a penis, an object, where her vagina just automatically just clenches, and obviously there's no penetration. However, a lot of women, when they experience this, think that they don't link it to trauma. Oftentimes, it's only working through with them that we see the connection. Painful sex, where as something as simple, and I also experienced this as well, where once the penis, even a finger, got to a certain point, I experienced this great pain. And when I went to the gynecologist, they did everything, they checked, and they could find nothing, and they told me that it's all in my head. We women oftentimes, when we experience even childbirth, and we're told it's all in your head, but it's not in your head. Okay. And pelvic dysfunction, variant types of pelvic dysfunction can arise from the effects of sexual violence. But I want to tie this into looking a little bit more at somatic psychology. Where is that body-mind connection, which is very important because we tend to disconnect the mind and the body, especially we as women. We think that the mind is the be-all and end-all of everything. And when your mind says yes, so if your mind is saying, so if you have a pain somewhere and your mind says, oh, that's nothing to take on, it's nothing serious, you then think, you go with your mind. But somatic psychology really is a unified model that simultaneously addresses top-bottom cognitive and bottom-up somatic interactive connections between body and mind. Okay, so top-bottom meaning I think, I feel, I sense. So I think that's the cortex. So that's your belief part of the cortex part of the brain, your beliefs, judgments, and whatnot. What you feel, the limbic system, so your feelings, emotions, and what you sense, the brain system, and then the bottom up, body sensation. So it's like a cycle. So it's a marrying of the two. And why is so very important? Because look at your body. This is your body here. All right, let me get a pointer. Your body. This is this is your body. So yeah, we know the skin, we know the skeletal system, we know the muscles, we know the nervous system, but we look at the endocrine system, the organs, and then your energetic body. All of this here, when you experience sexual violence, it's not just your physical body, it's not just your skin. It is memorized, it is embedded in every single one of these parts of your body. So when we talk about layers, it is layers. And then here it doesn't even show the atoms and even those the cells, all of those, all those carry memory. And then we have the mind. So this beautiful network, all of it is what holds trauma. What can hold trauma, I should say. And so let's look a bit at the mind. You have the left brain, which is the language center, the interpretive, analytical and explicit. And then the right side, that's the nonverbal, the intuitive, the body sensing, emotional, and implicit. So when you experience trauma, oftentimes it starts on the right side of your brain. You experience it, but if you don't have that unison of the mind body, where the left brain and the right brain communicate along with the body, sometimes what will happen is that you're unable to pass it onto the left side of the brain, where that's your language center. So that oftentimes is a case where a woman would experience sexual violence, but she's unable to articulate what happened or how she feels about it. Okay, so so look at case in point, rape victims who are afraid to go forward to have the person charges pressed against the person, or are afraid to testify, even to speak about it, is because they're just not able to process how to put it into words, because you don't have the unison of the system. So when you have that lack of communication between the two hemispheres, these are the problems that arise pretty much. So the disconnection of the right brain from the left leads to emotional experiences that cannot be adequately verbalized. So as a result, early emotional experiences remain unformed and impossible to verbalize. Emotional distress and trauma remain unprocessed. And then disconnection of the left to the right brain that leads to denial, in which a person can speak about emotional events but deny the significance of power. So in other words, they can speak about, yes, I was raped, I was sexually abused, I was sexually assaulted, but then they shrug it off. Well, that happens to so many different women. It hasn't fazed me, in a state of denial. Then when we go deeper, then everything comes to the surface. Additionally, a person may know that they feel sadness over a loss but cannot access any felt experience of that emotion. So when a traumatic response is triggered, the brain when a traumatic response is triggered, the brain areas responsible for witnessing and verbalizing decrease their activity or shut down, and the traumatic event is re-experienced in like body sensations, impulses, images, intense emotions, all without words. So then simply some tools and techniques. Somatic psychology, definitely psychology, counseling as well, and I offer an emotional release massage. Massage therapy is good as well, but emotional release massage actually marries somatic psychology, where we actually target different parts of the body, different organs of the body, and we help. So why is this important? Because sometimes they're not able to talk, as I mentioned, but they're able to release the emotion that comes with what they're experiencing, or what they're experiencing, or what they need to release. So we always ask, is it safe? Is it safe? We always ask the client, is it safe? Well, rather ask the client to ask themselves. Ask your mind, is it a reason why it's unsafe for this emotion to come to the surface at this time? And then ask your body, is there a reason why it's not safe for this emotion to come to the surface at this time? So we honor that space. Is very important. Safe spaces that are woman-centered are very, very good. And when I say woman-centered, I mean women who are working through, who are happy to have this safe space where it's about positivity, it's about realness, it's about helping, it's about laughing, it's about crying, and being able to release. Journaling is a very good one as well too, because in journaling you can keep that private. So you may want to start with journaling where you keep it private, and then you can review over time. And when you're ready to seek counseling, go to a coach or seek assistance, which is I highly recommend at some point, you can also walk with this journal and help to review, because you may not remember everything. Cultivating the womb, the feminine power, because that is your power source. As even through sexual violence, that womb, that feminine power can never be diminished. It's inherently yours as a woman. So it's just a matter of cultivating it, knowing the tools and techniques to cultivate that feminine energy. And then orgasmic intelligence is a technique that what I created is a mixture of ancient techniques, modern as well, and kind of like just packaged into a contemporary where you can get started on it right away. So orgasmic intelligence is simply using your six senses and your sexual energy to heal and empower yourself. It's an active self-love journey. Other tools and techniques, we have a solo cultivation, which some refer to as masturbation, but I don't like masturbation because masturbation is about the orgasm only. Solo cultivation is about exploring, learning, discovering different new erogenous spots about yourself. Yoni breathing, yoni massage, and I shared this here on this side, this because yoni breathing, yoni massage, yoni eggs, even of sexual intercourse or use of a wand or a dildo to massage the vaginal canal. Here we have genital reflexology. So while you are manipulating, whether it's your finger, as I said, or a tool, or penis, you are manipulating those organs which also can carry store memories of trauma. So sex is more than just sex. And I'm running out of time. So the couples focus on focused foreplay, slow or no penetration. Okay, you do not need to penetrate. Be in tune with your partner. If she says, and I'm speaking about the one who may have experienced sexual violence, please be in tune with her. Create safe words when when it's time to stop, where she feels uncomfortable. How do you know you're healing? Self-awareness increases, so you're aware of the triggers. They may still be very much present, but because you have the self-awareness, the intensity may not be as it used to be, where it sends you off into tangent or an emotional outburst. So you may become less emotional. The mind-body connection and the heart-womb connection alignment is the final thing I'd like to end off with, and this is helping you to make more conscious decisions as opposed to falling victim to your sexual urges. Because oftentimes, like for me, when I met my abusive partner, all of the red flags went up. All of the red flags went up. But you know what? He made me wet. He made me wet just by the sound of his voice, just by the way he said whatever it is, how he danced, how he moved, how he looked. And so I was very focused on my sexual urges. But simply placing your left hand on your heart and your right hand on your womb space and taking deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath in, you visualize the energy running from your womb space up to your heart. And and as you exhale the breath, you visualize the energy running from your heart back down to your womb space. You do that a few times, and you're aligning your heart and your womb space so that if you you meet someone and you feel that heavy the heart, it's all fluttery and whatnot, and then you have that intimate moment with that person and you find you're not becoming aroused, that means you're getting a yes from your heart, but a no from your womb space. So honor that. Stop. Doesn't mean that you have to make a 180 turn from the person, but just stop. Take time. Likewise, you may, as soon as, in my case, as soon as this person spoke, I got all wet, got all aroused, totally engorged, ready to jump on. But I was getting the heaviness in my heart. But you know what? I disregarded the heaviness in my heart. So I was getting a yes from my womb space, but a no from my heart. But when you get a yes from your womb space and doing the heart womb alignment and doing the breathing, when you get a yes from your heart and a yes from your womb space, you have full permission to move forward. It doesn't mean that everything will be, end up, you will ride off into the sunset and live happily ever after with this person, but it means that you will no longer have regrets, and you will understand that you will live in the moment. And I just want to end with this, to understand that to enhance your pleasure, your bliss in this moment or in lovemaking, focus on what you do feel, okay? Focus on what is already here. And if it happens to be nothing, if it's numbness or pain, can you make that commitment to meet whatever it is that you feel with presence rather than resistance? Because it's often feel that we must fight against the things we don't want in order to change them. But in truth, the feminine intelligence, the orgasmic intelligence is ever changing by nature, and we support this change by embracing it in each moment. So this doesn't mean accepting that for the next 5 years I'll feel this way. This is like a projection actually, but it means accepting what you feel this time right now. Bliss is an experience of allowing, of surrendering. And this is why even pain and numbness can be doorways to pleasure, to bliss, and to orgasm. Because when we allow these experiences, we experience the bliss that comes from aligning with the moment rather than resisting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that interesting discussion, Katrina. One of the participants mentioned in the chat that your transparency is healing to hear. So thank you for that presentation. This brings us to our third guest. Latoya Lane, who will be focusing on intimacy and approaches to sexual pleasure and desire after trauma. Latoya Lane is a sexual and reproductive health educator, sexologist, sex coach, and birth doula in training. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and psychology from the UWI App and a certificate in intensive sex therapy from Guelph University. With more than 10 years experience in the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights with the Barbados Family Planning Association and the International Planned Parenthood Federation, Latoya brings a wealth of knowledge and information from a sex-positive perspective on female pleasure and sexual health. Her business, Pillow Talk Caribbean, is currently evolving into a sexual health coaching clinic and research center where Latoya will assist Barbadian and Caribbean women by extension to understand and grow their sexual lives. Latoya, over to you.
Hi, good night, everyone. Thank you guys for staying tuned. I'm just going to go ahead and try to share my screen. So I want to say first and foremost, thank you to all of the presenters that came before me. Of course, Katrina, thank you so very much. She's paved the way in every way. I just say I'm a baby behind her. She's 20 years, I'm 10 years, right? I am the baby behind her. So I hope that I'll do her proud. This, I will say just as a caveat, that this particular area is one that I hold very deep and dear to me, because it's one of the reasons I wanted to be a sex coach, because I recognize the trauma in my community, and I recognize that persons were not getting the help that they needed to have. In particular, in my community where I grew up in Blackhawk, I had she wasn't a friend, but there was a young lady in my community that was murdered and raped, and that death and my community's response was so traumatic to me, and she wasn't close to me, that it really, when I went into this work, I have her in my forefront, in my mind's eye at all times, because I took it personally, and my community's response is the biggest thing that has ever impacted me as a female. But let us proceed, let us grow. And I say this is your journey with a sex coach. So, whoa, reclaiming pleasure after trauma. Now, you've heard the definitions of what is trauma. Katrina is giving you experiences of how trauma can manifest itself in your body, how it can manifest itself for you sexually. And reclaiming is because oftentimes we think that the ground cannot be won again. We don't think that that is something that we will ever get back. And I'm here to say that, of course, we can reclaim the pleasure. We can reclaim this ground. This is ours to hold on to and say that we will not let it go. It is not for anybody else. The power is ours. We take it back, because as we know, and for those of you who don't know, assault, especially sexual assault, is not about the sex. It is always about the power struggle. It's always about the ability of the individual to claim rights over you. And by reclaiming, you take back that power. And when I was doing more research and just ruminating to make sure that I've gotten enough diversity in my perspective, one of the things that one survivor said is that, sexual assault survivor said is that, you want to make sure that you're living a good life just to spite them. Because in spiting them, in living that good life, in showing them that you still will thrive, it's like, a piss off to them. I start with the winding path. There's no time stamp on trauma. There isn't a formula that you can insert yourself into to get from horror to heal. Be patient, take up space, and let your journey be the balm. And I like to think about it as a journey, and I like to talk to my clients about journeys, because when you think about it, just coming from point A to point B, you don't recognize that occasionally the journey is not like, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and it's a never ever marathon. Sometimes the marathon, you have to stop, take some water. You might have missed the pothole 3 holes down, but this pothole coming ahead, you might fall into it. I need to take a break, rest your ankle, that kind of thing. And that's what I like to think about this as a journey. Now, what kind of puzzle is this Latoya is building with you today? I'm going to tell you a little bit what is sex coaching and how it helps with sexual trauma. I'm going to talk about reclaiming sex and then reclaiming pleasure. The brilliant thing is that I have Katrina and I have Brenda, who's already came and they've already told you about the approaches that you can take for healing the mind and healing the body partially in this way. Sex coaching. Let me say what it's not. So many people think that when you come to a sex coach, I'll watch you have sex. And while that might be entertaining and slightly interesting for me sometimes, because people will ask, do you watch us have sex? I said, no. What are you looking for is a voyeur? And that's not necessarily my, I prefer professionals, and I like for my actors to be paid. So I only like feminist porn. I'm very bougie. But outside of that, just for good kicks and laughs, sorry that my video is gone, but if you can hear me, I will go ahead. Sex coaching is not that. It's significantly, especially in Barbados, where we are, it is a lot of talk therapy. It's talk coaching is the encouragement. Right. So from a sex coach perspective, we focus on creating healthy sexual intimacy. what does that mean? It means that I recognize that sexual performance alone is not enough. So it's not about the orgasm. It's not about the end in sight. It's about making sure that the sex is, as I say, provides an approach where sex can be nurturing, joyous, and beautiful again. It guides individuals on a path to change their sexual attitudes and behaviors and to learn new ones. Now, sexual performance is great. I love it. But it's part and parcel, but it's not just one big focus. What also the sex coaching allows you to do is to know that this person is someone that you can come back as a guided resource at all times, someone that you can refer back to. They give you the practical experiences and understandings of how the playbook on how to go. For example, Katrina noted that you can use journaling. Excellent tool. That is something you would get your sex coach to tell you about. She talked about mind-body connection, another thing that a sex coach will tell you about, right? So these are like it's not the traditional talk therapy, which is excellent and a great way to start, but it pushes you further and gives you unorthodox ways in which to handle the trauma that you've been infected. Now, one of the things I will note is that I am not a therapist. Well, my understanding is therapeutic. Well, I have a deep understanding of psychology, and I should just go ahead and get my master's. I am not registered as a therapist. So we always say as a sex coach, please, this is a hand-in-hand work. This is a one hand can't clap kind of situation. You come to your sex coach after you've dealt with your issues of depression, self-guilt, harming behaviors. And the reason why you do this is because what I am going to bring you into is going to be a lot of affronting of direct sexual activity. So I want to make sure that these are things that you have already seen that somebody else is helping you to walk this walk with me, or at least you've seen them to a point where they're saying, okay, look, now I can let you go and actually deal with the physical aspect of that. Now I can say you're going to be good for this. You shouldn't be severely triggered, because you will be triggered. You will hold those potholes in the road, but you've got enough tools from your therapist that you can move forward. Okay? Yes. So a little bit more about that. Well, when you're in sex therapy when you're in sex coaching, what occurs is that we talk and we provide you with homework on areas for you to grow on. We provide you with those tools, and we provide you with really detailed, personalized instructions. Onto this one. So reclaiming sex, and what am I talking about? When I talk about reclaiming sex, especially after sexual trauma, I'm talking about redefining sex for you, learning and expanding your understanding of sexual activities. So in my work, I recognize that, especially working with persons who are heteronormative, who are heterosexual, they are attracted to the opposite sex, and persons presenting in the opposite sex. We understand sex as only penis and vagina sex. We're only looking at sex where there's penetration. And if you have that view of sex alone, you would recognize that you have a very limited and minute scope of sexual pleasure as well, because you're not allowing your mind and your body to claim other areas as sexual. You're not allowing yourself to have more and different sexual experiences. So when I talk about reclaiming sex, I'm talking about sex more on a broad scale, and reclaiming areas that you didn't even claim in the first place. So if you've only allocated your breast and your vulva and your vagina, your inner as sexual zones, I want you to claim your lips. I want you to claim your shoulders. I want you to claim your arms. I want you to claim your mind. And in reclaiming these areas and finding new scope for sexual pleasure and rediscovering and opening the new sexual vibes, I also want you to learn new things in sexual health and sex education. Now, when I was teaching, doing peer education to my peers, these things were not taught to me to talk to persons about, especially when you have conversations about HIV and AIDS and sexually transmitted infections coming up in my era, most of the conversation was on shame, it was on blaming. And if they talked even about rape culture and rape, it was on the emphasis was always on the female to not get raped, not for men not to rape, to avoid certain situations rather than speaking to, persons not to engage in predatory-like behavior. And these are things that we've missed out. But one of the things, these 4 things in particular, give us the most trouble because they're often left out and they're not understood. So the 4 things that are forgotten in sex ed is arousal, your body's reaction to stimuli. And I write it in this way because for persons who've ever experienced sexual assault, arousal and your body's reaction to arousal from a stimuli can be seen as the body's betrayal. And that might give you even a secondary, almost it feels like a betrayal of your body to what you may have wanted within the experience. Desire, the wanting of actual sexual activity. Pleasure, your subjective enjoyment of that activity. So, and I'll give you an example. I'll show you a diagram. I hope this all comes together. And then consent, your ability to say yes or no to that activity. Now, these are important because we often talk about desire and arousal together, as if you can desire sex and then your body automatically will be aroused. And we often talk about arousal signifying desire, and it is not true. They're separate. They're separate things. And then pleasure stands on its own because even though you may be desirous of sex, you want it. Your body may actually be aroused by it. You may not actually enjoy the pleasure. And then therefore consent is an issue. So I take this quote. If people recognize that a physical response is beyond a person's control, kind of like salivating to the smell of food, delicious food, then maybe they won't misinterpret physical response as a sign of consent when a person is not consenting to a particular act. And I gave an example yesterday to another participant in another thing, and I was telling them it's kind of like when you become relaxed with someone and they think that because they've had a relationship with you, they've engaged in a particular activity with you before, that they can therefore go ahead and engage with it without seeking permission once again, right? And when you push boundaries like that, you would realize that you're not actually seeking consent. You're just really moving over the person. I'll make sure that is safe. Okay. So this is where we come to when you talk about reclaiming sex and recognizing that when you were reclaiming sex is about understanding sometimes that you will encounter things like sexual non-concordance. Now, this is a big word, but it has small meaning. And we've already established it before. We say sexual arousal and sexual desire may not always meet up. And when you're reclaiming your sexual responses and you're reclaiming sex, you want to give yourself the grace to know that sometimes you might be desirous of sex and your body will not respond. And that's okay. I realize that you may need to try something different in terms of what you've already tried before. And you may need to put something else on your what I tell clients is your sex menu. And I'll explain a little bit. So a sexual menu are things that you are willing and desirous of exploring. And you would write this, especially if you experience sexual assault. I recommend it highly. You get that journal that Katrina talks to you about, and Brenda will probably say go for it. And you write down things that you think you would enjoy. Things that you think are no, let me go back. You now think you would desire. Things that you would think are pleasurable. So use those 2 categories and ask yourself, what do I think I would desire? I would desire kissing. I would desire hand holding. This is how I see sex now for me. This is how I know I'm reframing this activity. Something that is now non-threatening. And then, of course, you put your own caveats on it and how you would like to be touched, how you would like to be kissed. And when you create that sex menu, then you're allowing yourself now to chart a new path of how you are seeking out sexual pleasure. And then you give yourself grace. You say, okay, just because I desire something and my body's not responding, I can try something else. Right. So creating great sexual experiences come in this lovely Venn diagram of these four things coming together. So you have pleasure, desire, arousal, and consent. And for somebody who's ever experienced sexual assault, of course, you are now thinking of continuous, and to be honest, this is the Venn diagram I show everybody, because this is how, when you open your mouth, your yoni opens, and she is aware and she knows that you say, yes, this is something that I desire, and you're authentic with it, then your body responds. So by having consistent and continuous consent, your body comes at ease. She knows, okay, look, or he knows that this is something that I desire, this is something I want. I like this person. And you can give yourself the permission kind of to proceed. So you have pleasure, arousal, and desire, and you continuously speak and affirm these things during the activity. And you will find that sexual experiences will become deeper, better, more enjoyable. Thank you. All right. So a new lens, dismissing all beliefs about sex and breaking down purity culture and releasing the shackles of cultural norms that hold pain and suffering. This is a mouthful. but with the culture that we're in, especially, what you want to be considering is, am I holding on? Use that journal. I'm referring to this journal that of course I love journals, so this is also, well, this is a mild fixation of me. I like pretty paper, so excuse me, right? But you have that pretty paper journal and you write down, okay, this is the things that people have told me about sex. These are the things that might hang up. They talk to me about purity culture, about being dirty, about not letting people soil me. These are the things that actually you may not notice initially, but these are the things that hold you back from going down this path of healing, of achieving a better sexual life after an assault. Because subconsciously, you're holding on to all these things that you've heard about sex and about how it needs to occur and what even rape looks like. Oh, it can't be rape. I didn't holler and scream. It wasn't a stranger. It was somebody I knew. And I initially, I knew them and I said that I liked them. And so that way, no, am I to blame? These shackles hold you in a chokehold for so long. And when you write them down and you dismiss them, it allows you to unleash yourself from this hold, right? And it also allows you to reframe them, give them new words, and give them differently. Right. So reclaiming pleasure, putting the sexual acts and sexual pleasures together and sexual acts, and trying to fit the puzzle so that sexual acts and pleasure now come back together. So how we get this done? Now, Katrina gave you great ways of doing this already in terms of reconnecting with your yoni, having that exploration, reconnecting with body and self, and that explorative process. These three things I think are great. You want to identify your triggers, include your patterns of sexual initiation, what may trigger you, how do you find sexual release, writing these things, noting these things, and if you voice note yourself and you note these things to yourself so that you know. So for example, if you know that a particular action triggers you, you will write down what's the opposite thing that you think would be better for your partner, right? And those are things that you can do to expand your pleasure. When you're expanding your sexual vocabulary, there are things that you may have had off the table before that you now see as things that you can now do, that non-penetrative sex. So you now think that erotica is lovely. You now think that if you've never erotica sex thing, workshops to reclaim your sexuality, to see yourself in a different light. These things that you would do in order to reclaim you and to erase the previous thoughts of something being lost would allow you to expand your pleasure and expand your pleasure base. Now, here's a cycle of how we can reframe when you were experiencing a trigger during a sexual experience. So this is brief. So you stop, you'll be aware of the trigger. You try to use calm and grounding reactions. For example, you might use deep breathing, hand on heart, the other hand on your belly, right? Which means just get guided you through that. You can do it right now, so you practice. You affirm your reality. You put your feet on the ground. You say, I'm here now, nothing is happening. And then two, you may change or switch it or alter the activities. That way, if there's something that's triggering you in a moment, you let your partner know and you switch it. So this is something that is, I don't like how my body's responding to this. And sometimes even you may not even notice it at the time, but afterwards, well, what we in sex coaching call aftercare, or the BDSM community, after you have sex after you've had like a sexual experience, you might say, you know, this thing happened during this activity, and the next time, how about we do this? Because I found it really hard to focus. I found it really hard to connect with you because my mind had drifted after you did this thing. And being able to talk to a partner like that is all same purpose, right? And I'm going to end on this one. Our job is not to deny the story, but to defy the ending, to write strong, recognize our glory, recognize our story, and rumble with the truth until we get to a place where we think, yes, this is what happened. This is my truth. And I will choose how this story ends. And I think this is imperative for anybody because you determine how your story ends. The beginning and the middle, you know, we will take it as is. But how it ends, you can determine that. Thank you.
Thank you for that interesting presentation, Latoya. Here, I would like to invite Taito Heron to relay any comments from the chat at this point before we get into our question and answer segment. Taito, over to you.
Okay, well, we had quite a few questions and comments, some of which we were able to have addressed while the presentations were going on because they were we had some anonymous questions being asked. Raise the issue of how the body can actually betray you and the disconnection between the body and desire because of previous sexual trauma. Sorry, I'm trying to. There was another question that came up asking us about OCD, if this is also a disorder that stems from trauma, or is this disorder from another cause altogether?
Just a few questions to our lovely panelists. Brenda, how do we identify or spot trauma, or how to identify if we have been violated? This question may seem to have an obvious answer for some, but often women and girls are coerced and don't know that they have been abused, especially girls, especially young women. So how do we spot trauma? How do we spot sexual trauma? How do we know when we are violated, especially if it is not an obvious forceful rape? How do we identify these things from your experience as a psychologist?
I think that's a really great question. And like you said, if it's not something that's been done forcefully, then sometimes, you know, we can doubt ourselves. And I've had some young people, especially for younger people, I find that sometimes they are not too sure if they have been. And what I always tell them is to trust your gut. These physiological responses that you feel, sometimes you're uncertain, sometimes you get this nagging feeling in your stomach that maybe something is not quite right. And that is something that is alerting you. That is a red flag that is warning you that something has happened that you're not too sure about. And I always tell them, go to someone that you can trust. Yes, there's going to be distrust issues, as all of us would have said in our presentations, but go to someone that you know that you can trust, or maybe call in on a hotline number, if anything, and ask a question, seek some clarification so that you can understand exactly what happened. And then once you get that clarity, reach out for support, because again, then the guilt and that kind of thing starts to overwhelm people as well. So once you have sought that clarity through talking to a trusted friend, then reach out for support so that then that guilt does not overwhelm you.
Thank you. My next question is about blame. You mentioned that just now as well. Blame and the blaming process, internal and external blame. So victim blaming from external forces, self-blame, guilt, shame, and emotional well-being. How do we even begin to manage that as survivors of sexual trauma? What do we do? How do we manage that?
And that is really heavy. That question alone is very heavy. So the guilt, the shame, and the guilt and the shame can come from external sources, and it can come from internally, like you rightly said. And so we have to begin to give ourselves, like Latoya said, the grace. Too many of us are too hard on ourselves. Sometimes we're doubly hard on ourselves than external forces, right? Yeah. And so I always have to keep reminding people, you have to give yourself that grace. What happened to you? Something happened to you. It was not your fault. And so continuing to reinforce that, continuing to reaffirm that for people helps them to understand that, hey, this is not my fault. And I think that type of reinforcement all the time, so that somebody can understand and hear it, because sometimes you can hear it, but you're still not hearing it. And so you have to consistently reinforce that, and somebody hearing that all the time, and depending on the environment that you have them in to hear it, right? And allow that to sink in, is when they're then able to begin the process of unwrapping that, delving deeper into that, so that we can explore it some more. And again, blame and stuff like that tends to come from experiences that you would have experienced growing up as a child. Maybe you were blamed a lot for a lot of little things, and therefore you think the big thing that has happened is still your fault as well, right? So once you're able to hear that, and then you can begin unpacking that as you go through the process. It's a journey.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, the post-traumatic stress disorder and OCD, I think it was that was mentioned, all those things come on top of the blame and all those other things when we are having those internal conversations about it being our fault.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that, Brenda. Katrina, over to you. Tell us a bit more about cultivating this womb power and tapping into our orgasmic intelligence and reclaiming our bodies and sexual pleasure and starting that active self-love journey. I know you mentioned massage and emotional release and you're using yoni eggs, etc. to help. What else can we do?
Well, first, I always recommend that you accept where you're at and stop looking at what is happening with Taitu. How many orgasms Latoya says she's having, and so start with where you're at. That's your beginning point. And then remembering, of course, as I said, the grace, be gentle with yourself. So it really starts with, because our society is always going, it's a very masculine driven society. And that masculine energy, which we all carry, men, women, every human being carries both masculine and feminine energy. That's a given fact. The XY chromosomes, the biology breakdown. So society teaches us as women and boys, it teaches the entire society to go, do that, doing, going, being. That is masculine energy. It requires you to slow down, and slowing down helps to cultivate the feminine energy. So when you slow down, so that slowing down can just simply mean when you come from the office and the busy world out there, and you come home, you take time to be. So that's just lying down, sitting in. You see, because but you remember, it's a journey. It's a journey. So if you go and you come in from work, I understand. No, I get this all the time. I will have a client come in and we're doing the being time, and I would say, okay, we're doing 5 minutes to start. And after 30 seconds, the client eyes open and like, I was like, no, we just begun. We just begun. But that's okay. That's okay. That's why I say, look at just accept where you're at. Start with if you come in and you start with a minute, And you focus, you just be, you bring your attention to your womb space, just into that darkness. It's a shining darkness, I like to call it. That is your power space. Just ground there for a bit. So if you ground for 30 seconds to start, and then you jump up, okay, that's
At the
fine.
start.
But then the next day, try for a minute. Next day, a minute and 15 seconds. And gradually, remember, it's a journey. So don't expect you that from the beginning you're gonna be able to be for just 45 minutes. No, it's not a force. It's a gentle wave of journey, because you may get to 45 minutes of just being and cultivating that womb space, and then the next week you can't do it for more than 3 minutes, but be gentle. So it's a journey of waves, ups and down. But the most important thing, and I can't stress this enough, is to be gentle with yourself. Remember that power in your womb space has birthed every human being on this world, on this planet. Then I don't know. I don't know any other power besides the universe and the trees and stuff like that. We carry the microcosm of the macrocosm right here in our womb space. Is the innate power. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I was asking for everybody, but you're talking to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My next question for you, and it links to the one you just answered, how do we restore that sensual and sexual balance within ourselves, that mind, body, spirit connection? Can you guide us through any specific techniques that we can use, something short, along with what you just mentioned, like breathing techniques, touching techniques, how to find those pleasure zones on our bodies and give into those pleasure zones in reclaiming ourselves and what we deserve.
Right. Well, it definitely starts with setting the mood. So pretty much being to yourself the kind of lover that you want to attract, or you want your lover to be in your life. So set the stage when you are coming to that me time, I call it, or if you want to step up and take it to solo cultivation, where you're exploring your pleasure zones and discovering new erogenous spots. Don't just get up and close the door and go in a little corner. No, you want to set the mood, light some candles. Make sure you have that time. Okay, so if you know the children are coming in the next 5 minutes, no, you want to have some time, and nothing less than half an hour. Okay, this is not a quickie thing. It's not a quickie thing. Okay, so set in the mood, put on some nice lingerie, take the time, look at yourself in the mirror. For some women, this might be a little traumatic, so
for
pace yourself. Okay, if there's something that feels uncomfortable, just stay in that space. Don't be like, okay, I'm gonna shut it down. Just stay there, in the moment. Breathe, feel what you're feeling, what you do feel, what you don't feel. If you feel nothing, that's okay. And then when you come to a space of where you feel an allowing, a more of a surrendering, then you can move to gently touching, and just gently touching, and not even talking about touching your breasts or your genitals, or those known erogenous spots, but touch, your shoulder, your neck. Hold yourself right here. This is like a comforting. So hold yourself right here. Take some breaths, and then gently, just like a feather, rub your hand all over your body. Just notice what you're feeling. Just notice. Just notice. It's not an aim to achieve anything, but just to discover and explore. Start with those parts that you've never really touched before, your neck, and go, all over your body, and just let it be slow, intentional, and sensual. Whatever you're feeling, just immerse yourself into it, and your senses is accentuate by your smell, some incense, a scented candle, some lights that are nice and dim and set the mood. Just accentuating your senses, helping you to experience the entire experience through all of your senses, can actually help you, and this has helped with clients. It takes the focus away from the genital orgasm, and you recognize you can experience the same euphoric feeling by just simply this light touch of, it might be up on your armpit. You'd be like, oh my god. And not a tickle, but oh, that felt good. So On mornings, women who love coffee, those who love chocolate, when you're drinking that coffee, instead of guzzling it down, oh yeah, I got my my caffeine shot ready to go. Take your time, sip it, smell it. You don't notice like, oh, I never realized coffee was this good before. When you're eating that chocolate, it tastes good, but feel your saliva just rushing, to your mouth and covering the chocolate. Keep it in your mouth for a bit and let it melt slowly, and just notice the sensations within your body. It's a slow, gradual, gentle process, and it requires slowing down.
I think what you touched on in terms of self-pleasure is important because oftentimes we are taught to have someone else pleasure us and not focusing on ourselves. Thank you for that, Katrina. And Latoya, to you, can you tell us a bit more about sex coaching and how you go about coaching individuals and couples? If you can provide examples for someone who may have never heard about sex coaching or experienced it, or maybe hesitant to seek help in reclaiming our bodies, what should we expect? Would the session entail? Can you talk us through any of the practical elements and what should we expect after the session?
Well, thank you so very much for the question, Kelly. And I'm happy to talk about it because people ask us a good question about what happens in these sessions. And as I joked earlier, they really do think that I watch them have sex because it's sex therapy. If you're not showing me practically what to do, then what are you doing it for? But we do a lot of talking. And in the initial intake, when I went to Guelph, my trainers talked about you're so good at your job, you assist them through the intake process. So while they're telling you about how they first were introduced to sex, that's part of the healing. So we do a lot of talking about where you learned sex from, how you seek sex now, and what kind of sex you want to be having, and how to chart a path together. We write that sex menu together. We talk about the exercises that you're going to do on this journey together so that you are going to achieve the kind of progress you want to see in your sex life. And right now, because of COVID, I do it purely online. But before, we had an office, and I used to come into the office and we would talk face to face. Most people ask me, are most of your clients girls? And I say, no, most of my clients are men first. And then women will probably follow their partners. I find that men understand that they're willing to pay money to fix the problems in their sex life, and women will only come in crisis situations. And that's okay. I mean, when you come to me, is when you come to me. I don't judge you either way, but that's usually the roll call of my clientele. I think that for the most part, persons get most of their satisfaction, to be extremely honest, by having the affirmation of recognizing that what they're going through is okay, it's normal, it's fine to have the doubts, the queries, the kinks, or just be wanting, for lack of a better word, vanilla sex. I think the experiences that they have in these sessions are eye-opening, it's comforting, and it really allows them to feel comfortable in what they're asking for and gives them the confidence to ask for more, ask for better, and to improve upon what they're experiencing currently. And I think that's the best thing I could give to somebody. Most people will say they like, I feel much better about asking for this thing. I feel much better about the fact that I feel more confident in going about trying this new thing, or including my partner, or getting my partner to come and see you. So that way we could really get this thing handled.
Okay, thank you. What about building skills for pleasure and arousal as an individual or a couple, and learning how to manage anxiety, which can also include sexual performance anxiety? How do we deal with those issues and improve communication with our partners, and even those internal conversations with self that may be interfering with experiencing sexual pleasure? How do we go about managing that? How do you talk to your clients? Talk
Kelly
to
does a lot.
I'm sorry.
But because as I say, most of my clients, especially for the first lots of my clients were majority of my clients were men. Performance issues came tantamount, hand in hand. Questions about erectile performance, am I satisfying my partner? Am I enough? And I think that it goes hand in hand with the capitalist society of thinking that you need to perform and outdo and foreign performance. And I asked them about how their experience is. Remember, we talked about arousal and desire and pleasure and consent. And oftentimes they wanted to perform not out of their own pleasure, but because they thought that's how what their partners desired. So we talk about genuine pleasure. We talk about genuine wanting of sex. So that they're not doing it because they need to satisfy particular standard of masculinity, but they're doing it because they want to actually have sex. They're actually consenting for the sexual intercourse that they're having. In terms of reconnecting to intimacy and things that we do, if you want practical exercises, then they're different things. So depending on the client and depending on their triggers, because even for men, there are certain triggers. If you have a client who, for example, their first sexual initiation was coerced, then making sure that they are fully present and consented to sexual intercourse. They don't feel pressure from their partner as if they're being pressured into it. So then what do they need to do to feel comfortable? What do they feel? What do they need as a stimulus to ensure that they are able to reach orgasm? And we work, and it's because it's so individual. It's hard to say with the blanket thing that I don't just assign it like a post-it note. Okay, journal today and do this. But it's like, okay, based on your traumas, based on what you have going on, this is what we're going to do. Sometimes it is things like your homework for this week is long kissing, and that's legitimately your homework. Your homework is stare passionately in your partner's eye for 5 minutes. You don't have any expectations of sex. They don't have any expectations of sex. You just want to connect and then leave it at that. And after you feel like having sex, then you have sex. If you feel like taking it further, you take it further. And some of the things you do is like unpacking touch so that it doesn't have to only be touch for sexual arousal. It could be sexual. It could be touch for comfort. Touch for connection, and that sometimes there's a lot of things that we're missing, and that's for men and for women, because I find that sometimes women, when my female clients, they would say stuff like, I don't know when he's asking for sex or he's just touching me up for no good reason. And it's one thing being touched, like feeling like you're getting a good go, another thing feeling like you're being harassed. So it's good. I often tell them, like, have very specific touch and descriptions for different things. So if it's for comfort, then know where it says, like, do the good touch, bad touch model. Like I would teach parents for their children. Where on my body are you allowed to touch? If it's looking for comfort, where on my body are you allowed to touch? If it's looking for sexual initiation, so that I know, I need to have clear signals here, and that way it allows them to chart paths that are clearer and it's less ambiguity. Ambiguity is the death of a great sex play, because nobody don't know, and they're going in the darkness, and everybody think that the other person knows, and nobody knows nothing. And that's how great Days of Our Life scripts start. Nobody says anything, but they have a look across the room, and then the person looks, and then this thing starts. And people have these beliefs that spontaneous sex, that sex happens spontaneous when they don't recognize that sex and sexual initiation and sexual arousal is actually something that's built up and develops over time, and it really does allow them to get a better aspect of their sexual integrated.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. I'm going to open the floor for questions. I have more questions for you, but I'm going to open the floor to our participants. The floor is open to you.
Hello.
Hi, Kay. Good
Yes.
evening.
Good
Go
night.
ahead.
The question I wanted to ask, when the third speaker was speaking, I believe that would be Latoya. She was talking about sex therapy. I'd never, maybe I might have heard of this, but I've never heard of people actually going or had any conversation with anyone about that before. So I want to know, how, like, I am not even sure they do that in my country. Like, how how do you get people into being open to actually have so somebody could go to sex therapy in a country where it's practically taboo to talk about sex because it's probably seen as a bad thing, or I don't know, like people people are not free in their sexual expression. So I don't know if anybody would even offer or say publicly they're offering sex therapy, and what would that sex therapy entail, you know? But if it is something that is being offered, or if I would have to find out if it's something that could be done, I wouldn't mind doing it.
All right, so can I ask? Okay, so to respond to Kay, all right, so I said sex therapy kind of interchangeably to sex coaching, so that's on me. So my apologies as well, because I am training up to sex therapy. So sex therapy is just the more specific psychological aspect and focus in a psychologist's practice on therapeutic interventions using psychology, right? So a psychologist such as Brenda, for example, could say that she is going to specifically deal with sexual issues. Primarily, she could deal with relationship issues, intimate issues, but sex therapy is like her main focus, and she's done extra master's level courses and that kind of thing to really focus in. Recognizing that we live in the Caribbean and our resource pool is low, there are other persons out there that are also sex coaches that you can actually find. And know that there is, because of how my brain works, I can't remember her name, but there's a lady in Trinidad and Tobago, right? And she does online. And she has her, because I don't have my master's, I don't say that I'm a sex therapist. That's why. And I just respect people that got a master's, you pay the money, you know, I can give you that jacket, right? But she has a therapist, she has a practice, and that's online that you can access. And one of the good and bad things about COVID is that it's really opened up your world to now see the roster of mental health providers on a blank slate, on a tabula rasa. Like, everybody's there, you can see, a Google search will get you. But I definitely know that the lady from Trinidad she's great. I've reached out to her, I've sent clients to her before that need more in-depth therapeutic intervention. I equally cannot offer to them. And it really allows them to, yes, I will do that. I will look for the TNT lady, because having somebody that you can reach out to in that way really helps. What I also do is that I look for people, well, Black therapists overseas as well, to see if anyone is sex coaches like that. So I look to see if there's any international coaches and international therapists that are offering their services that you can also intervene. But the one in Trinidad I know of in particular, I will look for her IG handle now and drop it in for that resource. And I hope that you are able to find that person. And one good thing is that with the lovely advent of the internet and the good and bad of COVID is that mental health practitioners come straight to you with a click of a Zoom button. It's fantastic.
I don't know if Brenda can chime in here, as she's a therapist herself. Brenda, if you want to add, talk about what you do, if you can answer Kay's question.
Oh, well, Latoya answered it correctly. Right now, I'm not specialized in sex therapy. I deal with the trauma aspect of it, and then I usually refer them on to Latoya for the sex coaching aspect of it. Yeah. So again, Latoya, you've got to get your master's up and running. So I can say sex therapy.
I decided to pause to have babies, and it's like I've been putting on all of the postdoctorate degree because I did the master's level course. Like, why are you not enrolled in the master's? Like, so I am working on it. I think it would take, but it's always interesting that I literally have the years of experience without the actual degree. Great for academia,
I know.
So that means have to go and get it done then, Latoya.
2021 has showed me, 2021 has really like just kicked me in the butt. It's like, listen, you have literally the roll call and the index of everything you have needed. Just literally, I just need Anika Henry. Thank you, Katrina, because this brain of mine is, I'm here like, I do searching. Right, Anika Henry actually is fantastic. She just did, I mean, like, I literally am over here in Barbara, just like pom-poms out cheering Anika, because she just did a presentation for the American Association of Sexologists, and ASAT is like a big association for sex therapists. And she did a presentation on like a Caribbean themed presentation on sex and sexuality. Fantastic. Like, I give their jacket, and I love it when we are winning in the area of sex and sexuality, because that's what you need. That's what you need.
Okay, any more questions?
Yes,
yes,
there are a few here. Hold on. One more question here from another anonymous attendee, and then I'll read the questions that came up during on the pre-registration. This question here, can verbal abuse in a relationship cause a person to completely lose interest in sex, and when it happens, feels nothing? I would say yes, but I'm going to allow, based on my own experience, I would say yes, but again, I'm going to leave it to my esteemed panelists to answer the questions. Yeah.
Definitely. Physical, I mean, yeah, verbal abuse can be so traumatic. It can impact the body in so many ways. So it doesn't just impact the mind, but it impacts how you see yourself. It impacts how you think others see you. And so, of course, if it comes then to physical intimacy, it's going to impact that. And you're just not going to feel connected to yourself, to your body, to anything that's happening. So, of course, yes, 100%, it will impact.
And you know, there was a study done years ago, I can't remember who did it, and he put bottles of water or glasses of water, and on each one you put love, hate, and positive words and negative words, and every day went and said love, 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 hate, 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 and so on to the respective bottles. And I think they had also rice in them. I think there were two separate ones. Yeah, two separate. So one with rice and water, and one was water alone. And months of doing this, when it came back, the one that said love, the water was still crystal clear. The one that said, I can't remember the exact specifics, but the hate was like dark and grungy. And likewise with the experiment with the rice that was love was white and pretty. The other one that was hate was all full of what do you call it? It was black and dirty and grungy and whatnot. So yes, words are vibrations, and we're made up of how much percent water? Like just over 70% water or something like that. And so yeah, yes, words can hurt. They say sticks and stones breaks my bones, but words will never harm me. That's not true.
I was just about to say so, Katrina, that when they say sticks and stones will break your bones, words will always kill you, all the way down to right down to the quick and to the core. So agree, just solidifying what the other said, and the exit strategy is always there. Don't stand for that. Don't take one for the team at all. You can leave that situation.
Okay, so we're actually going to run out of time soon, but I still think that since persons had asked questions prior to registering, that it would be good to see how best we can address these. At least what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the ones that have not been responded to. All right, so the first one was, how can persons who have never experienced sexual trauma support survivors in their healing? I mean, I think the first thing is really to just listen and don't make any assumptions and don't blame them, because I think we have a heavy victim blaming culture.
We do.
Extremely heavy victim blaming culture. So I think the first point of reference in in that, in supporting a survivor, especially when you know that that person has survived, is to listen and make no assumptions, listen and learn, you know. And I think this session this evening rather, has been really a great session of listening and learning and letting us understand how multi-layered sexual trauma is, and how challenging it is for us to reclaim sexual pleasure. So I mean, I'm going to leave it there. Throw out anything else if you guys want to add to that, but.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. So again, don't make assumptions. Like you said, we have that type of assumption culture where we like to place blame and find some place to put it, right? So don't make assumptions. Don't try to fix people. People just want you to be there to listen, to go through the journey with them. Don't try to fix. We have too many people that try to fix people, and that's not what people need during that time. They just need somebody to be there. Go through the journey. Take the time, like Katrina said before, take that time to go through that journey to heal. And don't take everything personally. Because somebody has gone through an experience does not mean that when they are upset, when they're frustrated, when they're angry, that is at you. Don't take it personally, because it's not about you. The process isn't about you. It's about helping that person get through that journey. Anyone else can add?
No, I think that was really good. So the next one is a partner will misjudge my uneven recovery progress. How can we keep the dialogue open if counseling is rejected?
I'm trying to interpret what the uneven recovery process. Brenda, let me speculate. You mean like going back and forth, you think?
It sounds that way.
I just want to make sure that the language is clear to me as it is to everybody else. Okay. Okay, cool. I'm always suspicious, and I will put this away. I'm always suspicious or hesitant when the partner is not willing to come to therapy, because I think it's a little telling. For me, it's a red flag, sincerely. But I also tell my clients that if they don't want to come yet, just keep coming so that you can show them the benefits of progress. You yourself will benefit from it wholeheartedly. But it also, like, the first question actually interlays to the second question, because for them to be a good supportive partner, they would have to realize or recognize that the process is not linear. You will be, as we showed, it is a winding road. So that's one of the things that they would have to let their partner know. And even if they don't want to go counseling, it doesn't mean you can't take home the homework and do the homework with them. So you still include them in the results of counseling that you went through, whether you do it overtly or you start to just implement it into your conversations and into the practice of the relationship so that they are involved. But yeah, that's I'll let the others take over.
Okay. Should I go ahead and ask the third question, or is anybody else going to add?
No, I think Latoya answered.
Okay,
so you can go ahead. Yeah.
The last one then is the impact of purity culture and how does it contribute to sexual trauma? That alone is an essay. Whew. The purity culture is something else. Anybody?
The person was trying to get me to do UWI level essays here today. I'll let Katrina start.
I swear.
Yeah, so the purity culture really goes hand in hand with the shame, the blame culture. This is a heavy one.
Yeah.
This is a really heavy
very
one.
Very heavy because
because different layers, angles.
And it's patriarchal as well.
Right. Yes. Deeply
patriarchal.
So this is a woman though, or do you know if?
Yeah, it seems. I mean, it's hard to say, but yes, it seems.
Okay. So. Yeah. recognize that you, if the person, if you're still on it, recognize and know that you are goddess. You've come with the tools, the everything that you need should you choose to birth humans. Okay? So there's nothing purer than that. Recognizing that. And even in going through the sexual trauma, being experiencing that, people even people will taint you whether you've been through sexual trauma or not. Even if a young girl has sex at an early age, it seems as though she's no longer pure. This is you should be a virgin, or you must have just one sexual partner.
As if she had
Understand?
sex with herself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I still think that is at the end of the day, standing in your power
Okay,
as a
thank
woman,
you.
usurp me.
No, go ahead.
Standing in your power to just taking back your power. Only purity there is you as a human being experiencing, and don't allow people to, no matter your experience, bring shame to you. I don't know how else, but that, for me, that's like a whole lot of layers. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything else.
Can I take and make an effort? There is, because the question that Miranda just asked in the chat is relates to the context of what purity means in that context, not the more enlightened definition that you have given, Katrina. The purity in that context is this false notion that you are pure if you're a virgin, and that you're young, that your vagina or your sexual parts, your organs have been untouched by several persons, that you have not been raped, that you didn't start sexual activity early. That sense of purity, whether it's, but it is also pure in quotation marks, pure for whom?
So it's
right,
also,
that's one part. So give me a minute. And then the second part, I think, has to do with this idea of leaving your body parts special and untainted, or so that for somebody special who is going to claim you, you're going to be a prize of it, as if your pum pum is a prize. All of those things are layered when it comes to the whole discussion on purity, as if it doesn't belong to you, as if we must hold it, don't do nothing with it, and hold on upon it till somebody special is going to take it from us, and we will retain and keep our purity, and we're going to hand it over to this wonderful person that has saved us from impurity and sexual immorality, because he is the one. It don't get no more patriarchal than that, because that's also not real life, right? And it also takes a decision from the woman and hands it over to this imaginary person, man that is supposed to, save us, right? And then it's wrapped up in menstruation. I mean, it is so heavy. It's so heavy. So I'll end my little contribution right here and hand over to Latoya to add hers. But it definitely has a lot to do with shaming when that narrative is disrupted, whether by consent for the woman or it's forced by rape. And how can it be recovered by honoring? You see it in other societies, when the woman is murdered, is raped, and it's her family, her husband, that has to be honored by her death, because she's no longer pure. So her value to the man is her purity, her sexual purity. Yeah, so it exists at different levels across different societies and cultures, but it is there. Here is the needle eye pum pum that comes up in dancehall culture. Yeah, that you must keep the pum pum needle eye. That is what it is. So it's not even, it really points to the extent to which the vagina our sexual center, it shouldn't even belong to us. It must be just hold on it and hand it over. Yeah. Therein that's my little TED talk for the evening. I'm going to hand over to Latoya.
Well, that was the best TED talk. I would like to say that TED talk needs to now sponsor this, because that was a period.
Taitu talk.
Taitu talk. That's what we can call it now. In the sex therapy, sex coaching, where we talk about purity culture, but there's a particular program, and I know we talk about purity culture dropouts, and these are individuals who would have grown up, as they call themselves, churchy. They went to church a lot. They are people that would have been had a good Sunday. I'm Anglican, so sometimes I don't really, it doesn't translate to me for some things, but it comes across for us as Caribbean people, in the reggae and in music and stuff, because they're reinforced homophobic and these other kind of discourses about purity. And really, the purity culture would tell you things such as, of course, you keep your virginity for your husband, you keep yourself pure, you are a passive participant in sex, and you should not want sex, you should not desire sex, sex is just for men. And you as a person, your desires and your needs should be subdued. And the harmful things in this is, especially when you come to sexual assault, is that the naming and blaming of how you teach abstinence and abstinence-based education it's heavy for the purity purity culture, in that you teach people like they're going to be chewed up chewing gum. What does that mean for a sexual assault victim? Somebody who has sexual assault from day one in their household. It doesn't allow them to chart their own path, and it doesn't allow them to see themselves as an individual separate from cleanliness. And the funny thing is about it, even the saying of cleanliness is next to godliness is not even in the Bible, and with a marketing term, but great marketing. So I think that purity culture can be harmful in that regard, in terms of how people take it and they seek to control women's sexuality and sexual ability through it, and how they seek to make it a tool for repression. Because anything that is good, people can flip on the outside. So that's how I see purity culture. But it is very layered, and I do see clients all the time about, especially how they're able to express themselves in bed and talk to their clients, their partners, and even men. Sometimes when they say things like, "I don't know why she's so aggressive," is a major turn off, and it is a turn off particularly because nobody told you that women had a desire. You always thought that you were the only person that was supposed to pursue. It's a tough, hard world out there, my boy.
Any more questions, Taitu?
No, those were they. I think we also do have to wrap up. We have gone 20 minutes over.
Yes.
Actually, more than 20
over to you
minutes.
for closing remarks, but I just want to say a short thank you to everybody. And persons are asking for us to have this discussion continued, probably maybe in a circle, a sister circle, a smaller session, a supportive circle where we could all talk to each other and and flesh out some of these issues, even if it's just to listen. So that's on us.
That's on us. Exactly, that is on us.
To you for your closing remarks.
Okay. I mean, I'm not going to say much because we really don't have a lot of time left. But first, I just wanted to thank our panelists, Brenda Roach, Katrina Ifill, Latoya Lane. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk this evening, to share your expertise, to share your knowledge, and to share your insights with everyone. We had quite a few persons here this evening, over 40 persons here. Thank you so much thanks as well for the partnership with UWIHARP, to Leah Anderson, Monique Springer, to my colleague Kellyanne Knight, who wears both hats at WANDA and UWIHARP. We're grateful that we have that kind of flexibility, because it means that magic can happen. So I'm also grateful that you're here and you guided us with some really wonderful questions this evening, I must say. Thank you to UWI Open Campus, the IT team, Tommy Chen. Thank you so much for your support this evening. Thanks to marketing for helping us with the flyer. And of course, thanks to everybody here who came in this evening in the chat, who listened attentively, who asked great questions. And what we're going to do is we're going to share, so here we go, we have the panelists' contact information there and that you can follow up with. And what we'll also do is please take the time to follow WAND and UWIHARP on social media, WAND_UWIOC, and also UWIHARP, exactly that, at UWIHARP, Cave Hill at IG and also on Facebook. And you'll be able to follow us and get some more information on other events, follow-up events. Here you have the contact information for the 3 panelists this evening who continue to do the work that they do. So if you need follow-up with any of these individuals, that information is right here. And if the evening ends and you still don't have it, please just drop WAND or UWIHARP a line and we'll be sure to pass on the information for Miss Brenda Roach, Katrina Ifill, or Latoya Lane as soon as possible. And that's it for this evening. Enjoy the rest of the season. We're moving into December. Happy Republic. I don't know if that is what I'm supposed to say, but Happy Republic, Happy Independence, and see you all soon. Much love and blessings on behalf of WAND and University of West Indies Open Campus.